Seconds. So we might be live now, but it normally takes a few seconds till we are really live on LinkedIn. So today is a wonderful day. And so welcome everybody. You are either watching or listening to the LinkedIn Live, or you might watch this as a recording, but welcome to today's sessions. I have with me today Miriam Suchet, which I'm very pleased to have you. And before we dive into the topic of big transformation failures and AI or S4 being as kind of like example of those big transformations, can you give kind of like the audience a little bit background to yourself and what you kind of like bring to the table?
Yeah, very welcome that I'm here. Thank you very much for having me, Carsten. To myself, I have a long-standing background in the technology area, which I never thought of, but it dates back until 2002 when I started working with SAP, was there for about 10 years, and then had many projects in the SAP area, in the production area there, but afterwards went into the architecture area at Wacker Chemicals. But still, it struck me that there are so many companies who are still struggling with digital transformations, be it S/4HANA, be it big data nowadays. I was always wondering and had this hypothesis, it has something to do with the people. And so that was what I collected in the last years as a combination to the things that I brought to the table before, to really understand what is there behind, what are the mechanics, why some of the projects work and some don't. And right now, after some years in the consultancy area with Campana and Schott, I'm very pleased here to bring everything together, the people part and the technology part and the process part, to really make transformations work. Because I think, that's what we need right now in our companies.
Yeah. Speaking of kind of like the need for transformations, I think that's so the first thing that I think we're all realizing is that it's like way more transformations are ongoing. Like very often in organizations, there are multiple transformations ongoing. Versus if we look back like 15 or 25 years ago, and we both date already a little bit, so we have that experience. So I think it's increased the number of transformations or also the likelihood of an organization to be in a transformation. So I think there is also a need to up the game with the capabilities within organizations to make those transformations successful. And that's why we're kind of like here to see what are kind of like some of the aspects to make them successful. Because changes are quicker, like the world is evolving faster, so we need to kind of like transform and we need to be more successful, because otherwise organizations will kind of like be steamrolled by others. So you mentioned kind of like the parts of process and people and technology, which is kind of like very often part. Where do you think among those three is kind of like the biggest hurdle or the biggest chance of failure buried in?
Of course, in the end, it's the combination. But I think what we oftentimes believe, and that's why I like that you say, the transformations are getting more complex. Because why is that the case? Because we have so much more digital toolings in our landscapes. We have so much more data lakes and fabrics or whatever in all our companies, and so much more complexity to understand before we can even change or transform business processes. So in the end, of course, you would say, people really do underestimate the beginning of the projects. They don't have really a deep down grounded process vision, what they want to achieve. You could say that, okay, and that might be right, but what is behind is that from what I understood in all the last years and all the projects that I saw is that people do underestimate that because they are living sometimes a little bit in this paradigm of we need to get it done. So this paradigm of pressure management, that this is a really urgent thing that we have to get done and it needs to be successful. And what people tend to do then is to decide under pressure and under speed. And what happens there is that you don't look one step back. What do we need to prepare up front? Maybe, for example, if we are looking at an S/4HANA transformation, what happens there is that maybe you have the intention to really grow your company, but maybe you just have a high-level process vision there. And maybe you haven't involved all the experts that you would need because you don't have them yet. But if you would step backwards and if you would take a little time, you would see, okay, let's have a look at what this really does from a not only change perspective. We don't only need to communicate and make training plans and so on that the people adopt it, but what is really behind from a paradigm shift. Okay, maybe there are new competencies required that we don't have yet, and we would need to understand whether we build them up front or we even involve people who need to build them on the long run. And that's why oftentimes critical aspects are overlooked even in the beginning. So that's really an interesting thing. So in the best manner of really making things fast, in the long run, you have the risks that you haven't foreseen in the beginning. So, but yeah, that's my point of view here on that point. What is it that you encounter? Because I see you have also a broad a range of experience in these areas.
Yeah. I think it really is a combination of things that kind of like make big transformations or big projects fail, and it you of course have kind of like what I consider kind of like as a bucket of things that you easily can avoid. That's kind of like things like sponsorship or funding, like with the business case, with kind of like the right partners that you might kind of like engage. So I think it's a lot of kind of like more mechanical setups. It's still like a lot of organizations fail to do that, but I think it is the easier problems to kind of like move away or kind of like solve. I think what is missing very often is kind of like a clear vision what success will look like, and that also includes always like coming from some more IT background, a clear target architecture, a clear kind of like also technology setup, process setup that you want to have in the future. And the second part, going into I think what you mentioned is the change management, taking people with you, and alongside a transformation, you have normally not a sprint culture, but a marathon. So you need to look for how can you ensure that people stay engaged, that they do feel they have a voice that they can raise, and that you also set up your teams so that they are successful in the long run, but also in for multiple phases. So you might engage with different people or different teams differently throughout the whole thing. And very often it's kind of like set up as a project, but not kind of like as a series of smaller projects or series of smaller phases of your transformation where you need a different setup of your teams to make it successful.
Mm. Yeah, that's a. Sorry, you wanted to ask something.
Yeah. So looking at kind of like the people side, what is kind of like things? I think also the change management has changed over kind of like the last decades, with like psychology, safety coming kind of like up. What are kind of like some aspects there that you feel is often overlooked or you see as critical for success and transformations?
Yeah, that's a great point. And you mentioned something about raising voices before. And that's oftentimes what I see about it. So often you see still today the companies that um, have worked on a transformation for about a year or 1.5, and then at a certain point in time, they realize, oh, our data migration approach is not good enough. The data is not enough prepared. So, and these are things that could be reduced. I mean, these are complex projects we are talking about, of course, and there are risks, and on the other hand, you have to manage the risks and have a look at how much is the likelihood of that risk to really come up. But nevertheless, once you really establish a culture of openness from the beginning, a culture where you really speak up, irrelevant whether you are a top management CEO, whether you are a business lead, or whether you are an employee who's just involved in that project, just irrelevant of that topic, in case you see a risk that really is there and that is overlooked. For example, integrating the data architecture from the beginning, because that's very often overlooked. And then afterwards, it really can crash the whole project. Or even, as you said, the target architecture, it's so oftentimes not really decided. I mean, is it only the core that we want to have? Do we need to have some additional solutions? And which ones are those? And there are in many companies, I mean, depending of size, that's clear. But in many companies, you have these experts who would be able to talk about that. But oftentimes they don't do it because they think, I don't think that's relevant for the moment. I don't think it's heard at the moment. Okay, they have decided right now. Or like this partner discussion that you said before, choosing the partner very, very soon and not having the clear look, what are our capabilities, what is really the match that we need. There as well, there would be voices in the company oftentimes who could say, I would think about that twice. Have you considered this or that aspect? Which you oftentimes cannot, it's not possible to cover that from a top management perspective because it's too deep down. And if you here just raise the climate from the beginning and also have the formats where those levels and those barriers are a little bit not erased, but reduced, then you really gain a culture where you can speak up, where you can also confront with a situation that is not that good without sugarcoating, without just saying, yeah, okay. It might not be that bad, but in the end you think, oh, that's a critical point. And that happens so often. And in the end, these are oftentimes the things where you say, okay, we started with an intention of redesign, for example, in such S/4HANA transformations. And in the end, we realize, okay, it's no redesign. It's just on the new technology. And we're happy about that. It's over.
Yeah, I think, so first of all, if you're watching this live or as a rerun, feel free to ask questions, even if it's a rerun. Miriam and I are monitoring the comments here, so happy to also answer questions after we're live. But if you happen to be live now, you can also ask and we get to your question while we discuss it. So I think the interplay of culture or like the people side and like also the architecture or technology side is also something that could be used more. Let's phrase it positively.
See what you mean. Yeah.
Because I think there is some synergies, like where a good architecture, a good kind of like target vision helps people know what are kind of like their boundaries, but also where are potential collaboration points, because they know this process ends here or this process like will now be part of it, or has to be working in these like 5 new systems that we kind of like set up here. So it's something where I think having the target architecture and having kind of like some clear understanding of how some of the technology will look like also helps people to collaborate on what kind of processes and how they will kind of like work together will look like. And but I think there might be also the other way around, that kind of like having a good team is also reflecting into better design decisions when it comes to like S4 decisions, or also AI, where can we use something even maybe more or maybe together, or also like changing processes or system boundaries that we had before, because we now work differently together and can therefore overcome some of the hurdles or issues we have today. So that's why I think it's kind of like good to have that interplay between culture and technology.
Mm.
What is there like a something specific when it comes to you, what you experience with like S4 or AI, where you see how much is kind of like a general transformation setup success or failure, and how much is kind of like maybe something specific to, oh, S4 is so different
Mhm.
or AI is so different?
Yeah, that's a great point, and I would love also to come back to the point that you mentioned with the bringing together of the business part and the technology part. And I think that's one of the most critical aspects in almost any of these large transformations, where you really step into the business processes, because when we date back, we have a heritage. I have the feeling that really in many organizations still there is this attitude of, okay, the IT has to manage that. I'm sorry, I don't need to understand the details. That's none of my business. But so is the opposite. Partly also from an IT perspective, to say, okay, but I mean, I understand it a little bit, but then it's okay. And I think currently it's really essential in these large transformation to combine these expertises, because it is so much combined from a technology perspective, so that you can't do it elsewise in the role profile. So the people that are deeper in the technology. Yeah, what I really see is that these transformations that we see right now, they have a huge size, so to say, and they really jump into the crucial parts of the business. And if you look for the S4HANA transformations, then the whole company is involved. The CEO is involved, the whole board is involved, all the top management is involved, and almost not any, but many employees are involved. And that's one of the crucial parts why there's complexity at scale. That's the one point. And there's also this micropolitics that you have in any company at scale. And that's oftentimes so much underestimated. That's the one point. And the second point, coming to your question, considering AI, I think there we have a new phenomenon that everyone kind of like sees, I understand AI. I do that. What do you want to tell me? I do that every day, and I know what I want to use. So, and that's another bridge between business and IT that has to really be closed. Because there are things in the end to consider, so that your data protection is right, that your architecture still is fitting, that your costs are not exploding. So all the things that I think pretty well from all the experience, are there in the end. But in the beginning, it doesn't look like that.
Yeah, I think AI is really also changing, or is a very loaded topic. So I think it happens, like we discussed it earlier, with kind of like the people side, where it's kind of like change management and psychology, safety, and all these aspects. AI, of course, is coming with fear. Like a lot of people fear what is coming with AI, and it's like, am I getting like out of my job, or how much of my job will change? And people have kind of like all these perceptions from like the newspaper and movies or whatnot out there. So it's kind of like something where um, it's I think the impact or the fear is also much deeper than a S4 or something else, which is kind of like still core and big in an organization. But I think AI comes with kind of like so much more of fear. So you have that culture side being like on a, I think, a different alert level. But you also do have the technology is new. You mentioned kind of like cost or aspects of like scaling, where you say, yeah, like my little chat GPT or Copilot or Gemini or Claude or whatever technology it is. It's kind of like easy to use from a like one person, but if you scale it to many users and lots of like interactions, then kind of like the cost can explode there as well. Um, so and plus, I think it's something where the EU AI Act comes in, where you need to like classify your AIs. You need to think of the predictability is different than kind of like traditional algorithms. So you also have something where, oh, this prompt worked once, but then like my colleague does the same prompt and it has completely different result, or doesn't have that reliability or validity of the results in there. So I think the whole technology part is also evolving, new, and with lots of angst loaded as well. So I think AI transformations are right now the most exciting ones, the ones that I love the most, but it's also the ones that the hardest to do because of those two, um, yeah, harder parts of like transformations. Would you agree, or do you have like other? Because I know you participated or but like guided some AI implementations at also some bigger organizations. So maybe you
Mm-hmm.
can give some insights into where in the AI world are kind of like the biggest struggles from your perspective and experience.
Yeah, I see your 2 points. I would add a third one is really to see where do we start and where do we create impact in the end. But I think that's after those two that you mentioned, and I totally agree with that. Maybe coming to the first part where the AI hack helps, even that you need to train your people to really get along with this new paradigm of how these transformers work, and that they sometimes give out what you want, sometimes it's a bit of hallucinations, sometimes it's a bit different. There you really need to get used to it, because otherwise what happens is that if you don't train and support people with it, they just use it once and then they say, okay, I'm sorry, I can't use it, I can do it better. So that's the one half, and the other half says, okay, I'm crazy about that, I want to use it. So, but in the end, you need to have whole processes that are done in a more efficient or more innovative way. So it doesn't help if the one half says the one thing and the other half says, oh no, I don't want that. So you need to bring the people together, and yeah, there it can absolutely help to really nurture them on the one hand with support, with training, but also to guide them step by step and what can it mean for my business process. And to the second part that you mentioned, the German Angst, I heard about that, and that's truly a super important and a very underestimated point here right now, because there are these voices on the one hand who say, okay, it really has a tremendous effect on our jobs. Many jobs will be vanished in the long run. And the others who say, okay, no, nothing will happen at all. But from what I see here right now, is of course we are still in kind of like a hype cycle on the AI parts in some areas. However, the job profiles will change tremendously. And that I'm pretty sure of. Of course, some of the solutions currently are not ready for the use, for example, in the production area or so on. But even there are coming solutions who can be used. And even there, we need to have a close look how much of a technology understanding, how much of an algorithm understanding you still need to have there, and how much merge of business understanding and technology understanding you really need to have, which wasn't the case in that intensity before. because the technology was covered somewhere. So I totally agree with your point there. But what I would be interested here in is if you could give the one most important tip from your perspective to companies who are tackling maybe an AI, maybe an S/4HANA or whatever transformation. What is really true to your heart the most important thing that you'd say, if you could consider it, do that?
I really struggle with like the one part here
I
because
see your point.
the whole thing with big projects or big thing like changes like transformation like S4 or AI is really the size of it, and with that I think the whole or for me the biggest thing probably is to and now I kind of like I sum it all up in one thing, but it's kind of like lots of things in there. I think the one thing is really the recognize the size, and with the size of the change, you need to have a good vision and a good where to go, because if that is if that is not the case for something small, like okay, you might end up somewhere else, but like no big harm. But if you don't know where to go for like a big, it's like a lot of dollars sunk or a lot of people resources wasted. So that's I think is kind of like key, but also the whole, like I mentioned at the beginning, you're kind of like setting it up for a marathon. So it's not a I put it in, I'm done. It's kind of like a longer process that involves in different phases, different people, and you need to like plan for that, and you need to have some partners. Versus like smaller project, you might be on your own, but like for a transformation, I think a recommendation is also to have integration partners or culture guidance. You're doing a great job there, Miriam. So highly recommend kind of like if you're doing a transformation to get Miriam involved as well for that, because you like no matter how good your own staff is, because I think the length of it plus those different phases, you need some external partners. So that like to sum it up, recognize the length and the size of that transformation and therefore do things differently than if you would do just a normal project.
I would take it off. Totally agree. And thank you very much. Also appreciate what you're doing. Otherwise, we wouldn't be talking here. So yeah, absolutely. Maybe I would just add the people part in the beginning, because I think that's something new, because we are so used to this agile project, for example, and we think like, we are doing that. We're caring about our people, but it's still on a method level oftentimes, and not really on these underlying mechanisms that are working, whether people are speaking up or not, or whether there's a hierarchy and you feel you're not allowed to say anything. And if you have any chance to really integrate it from the beginning, to really have an open setting where you feel high confidence to speak about the things that matter, I think that's a lot.
Excellent. Yeah, I think speaking of people, we do have our annual conference coming up, July 2nd and 3rd in Munich. I think this time you're not a speaker, but you've been a couple times a speaker there, and you know the event. And I think it's something that I always love about but also other conferences, is really kind of like to be together, get some input from real world CIOs, head of strategy, different digital leaders, and getting into discussions with the speakers, but also with others in the audience. And hey, how did you perceive that? Was that also an issue for you? And get some guidance for your own initiatives or transformations.
Yeah, it's a great conference. I can only recommend it, because I think there's a variety of interesting people there, from the different angles, from the business part, from the technology part, from the people part. So yeah, I'm also very much looking forward to it.
Yes. So if you want to see Miriam, come to the conference, but also feel free to leave a comment here, ask a question. We didn't have any questions coming in right now today, but we are watching this event on LinkedIn as well. So if you want to ask us or also add your number one thing that you think a transformation should incorporate for success, please leave that also in the comments for others to learn. So thank you so much, Miriam, for joining us today here and running this with me together. And looking forward to more joint projects, and all the best for your day.
Yeah, thank you very much as well. And I really will hurry up to also set up LinkedIn Lives and podcasts where you can then join. Be a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Have a good one, everybody.
You as well.